Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are diving into what has to be one of the absolute most absurd and, honestly, unintentionally hilarious historical events on record. Imagine a scenario where a dead farm animal and a half-eaten vegetable garden literally brought two of the world's greatest superpowers to the very brink of a massive global conflict.
The escalation was just instantaneous. Imagine hearing this conversation. Your pig ate my potatoes, so now I'm calling the U.S. Army. Oh yeah? Well, I'm calling the British Royal Navy. You'd think this was the playground argument, right? But no, this was the actual literal catalyst for a 13-year international standoff. It all kicked off as a shockingly petty dispute between two guys on a peaceful, sunny island. You had an American farmer, Lyman Cutlar, who was sick of his potato patch being raided, and a British guy, Charles Griffin, who owned this perpetually hungry, trespassing pig. Cutlar, absolutely horrified that his livelihood was becoming a daily snack, just grabbed his rifle, shot the pig, and effectively served up a side of mashed potatoes with a bang.
Which leads us to a pretty bizarre question. How exactly do you solve a problem like a dead pig? Now, if you or I were in this situation, we'd probably just walk over, knock on the neighbor's door, apologize, offer to pay for the damages, and move on, right? But if you are the United States and Great Britain in 1859, a simple "my bad" is completely off the table. Instead, you decide it makes total sense to escalate the death of a single farm animal into a decade-long military standoff that almost triggers World War III.
So, let's take a look at the root cause of this whole mess: the Oregon Treaty of 1846.
What's so fascinating here is how this super vague wording of this treaty created a massive geographical headache for everyone involved. Back in 1846, the US and Britain agreed that their border in the Pacific Northwest would follow the 49th parallel and then go right through, quote, the middle of the channel out to the Pacific. Okay, simple enough, right? Well, the problem was there were two channels. The British insisted that the border obviously went through the Rosario Strait, which meant San Juan Island was British territory. The Americans, they told him to back off, claiming the border clearly went through the Harrow Strait, making the island firmly American soil. And because neither side wanted to admit they'd signed a terribly written vague treaty, they both just kind of awkwardly moved on to the exact same island. The British set up a sheep ranch, the Americans set up farms, and they basically lived together as bad roommates in a tense, awkward silence.
All right, bringing us to the potato incident and the spunky generals. So after Cutlar shot the pig, the posh British owner, Charles Griffin, was absolutely furious. He claimed this was a beautiful, prize-winning pig worth a whopping $100. His argument was basically, look, it's an island. Pigs are going to wander. But Cutlar, fiercely defending his American garden, offered him a measly $10. Well, Griffin was deeply insulted and actually threatened to have Cutlar arrested by British authorities. Cutlar's response? You and what army? This is American soil. And, terrified of a British jail cell, this American farmer ran straight to the U.S. military to save him.
And boy, did he find the right guy. He found General William S. Harney. Now, Harney was a man who really didn't like the British. So when he caught wind that British authorities were supposedly bullying American citizens over a dead pig, oh, he was outraged. His immediate reaction was literally to declare, "We need to send in the best, most spunky officer we have." Enter Captain George Pickett. Sure, Pickett was only a captain, but he had a whole lot of spunk, and Harney decided he was the absolute perfect guy to go man the walls on San Juan Island.
So Pickett lands on the island with a minuscule force of exactly 66 men. Yep, that's it. 66 soldiers to assert complete American dominance. He sets up camp and basically tells the British to pack up and leave the island. Now, as you might guess, the British governor, James Douglas, wasn't exactly quaking in his boots over Pickett and his 66 guys. Instead of writing a strongly worded letter, he immediately escalated the whole situation and sent in the warships.
So suddenly, Pickett's 66 guys find themselves staring down a staggering British force of 2,000 men.
And it gets worse. The British Navy didn't just bring men. They brought 3 warships equipped with 70 guns pointed right at the American camp. I mean, they packed enough firepower to literally turn the entire island into a crater. So, what on earth was Pickett's outside-the-box strategy when faced with 2,000 men and 70 cannons? Well, he asked General Harney what to do, and Harney's brilliant tactical advice was simply, we send more men. Enlist everyone. Dig in. So Pickett just decided to stay right there, look tough, and completely refuse to budge.
Let's look at the 13-year standoff in the eventual de-escalation.
For weeks, this absolutely massive military presence just sat frozen at the island gates.
The British sailors were quite literally at the threshold, but they had been given very strict orders not to fire first. And why? Because the British admiral on the scene rightly deemed that starting a global war over a potato thief would be incredibly unprofessional. I mean, it was just a phenomenally dumb idea. So, with nobody allowed to shoot, the soldiers literally just stared at each other. Eventually, the tension broke in the most hilariously human way possible. The American soldiers and British sailors realized they weren't actually going to fight, so they just started hanging out and playing cards together.
Now, while the soldiers were busy playing poker, news of this crisis finally reached the actual government leaders in Washington, D.C. and London. And the reaction in both capitals? Utter disbelief. They literally could not fathom that their militaries were ready to blow each other off the map over a local farm dispute. President Buchanan quickly realized he needed to send some serious adult supervision to clean up this mess.
That adult supervision arrived in the form of General Winfield Scott, the unofficial head of the U.S. Army. Scott showed up and essentially put these hot-headed generals into a military timeout. His message was loud and clear. Harney, you're a moron. Pickett, go home. He shut down that chest-puffing contest immediately.
To make sure cooler heads prevailed, General Scott and the British agreed to a joint occupation. Think of it as a mandatory international cooling-off period. Both the US and the UK agreed to drastically shrink their forces, leaving exactly 100 men each on the island. They'd share the space peacefully and just sit tight while waiting for an objective third party to finally look at a map and decide who actually owned the place.
Moving on to the grand finale, the Kaiser steps in, which is really the punchline resolution of this whole thing.
The sheer absurdity of government bureaucracy is just staggering when you look at the timeline here. The confusing treaty was signed in 1846. The pig was shot and the standoff began in 1859. It took 12 full years of joint occupation before the two nations finally submitted the dispute to arbitration in 1871. Think about that. That is over a decade of waiting around to resolve a fight that started in a vegetable garden.
So who was the third party they finally asked to settle this mess? The German Kaiser, yeah. The Kaiser was brought in, he took one look at the maps and the channels, decided the Americans were right about the Haro Strait, and just casually handed San Juan Island over to the United States. Just like that, with a stroke of a pen, he ended the whole ordeal, basically telling them to stop bothering him because he was busy being German.
And here is the ultimate punchline of this entire historical deep dive. It all comes down to the casualties. Despite all the initial threats, the calling in of General Harney, Captain Pickett, and his spunky 66 men, the arrival of 3 British warships, 2,000 British troops, and 70 massive cannons, the only casualty of the entire conflict was Charles Griffin's prize-winning pig. Yep, 100% of the casualties were pork-related. 0 humans lost their lives.
It really makes you step back and think about the nature of human conflict, doesn't it? The sheer dangers of rapid escalation. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. If 2 global empires nearly sparked a massive, destructive war over a trespassing pig in 1859, what seemingly massive, ego-driven conflicts today will history view as just another potato patch squabble? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history behind the headlines.